which is apparently much better than the one by Pfizer. Moderna is the name of the company that's come out of this one, and apparently it's better than the Pfizer vaccine because it can be transported and stored more easily and with less volatility, meaning it could get to hard to reach places in the world. That's apparently the good thing about it, but of course many people are slightly concerned by Matt Hancock claiming, refusing to rule out is probably a better way of putting it, that it would be compulsory for people to have to take it, or certainly compulsory for certain situations. So we've been talking about how you feel about that. We've also been talking as well about to what extent, when it comes to free speech about vaccines or anything else really, broadcast careful to obviously make sure that free speech is respected and that people get to have their point of view aired, but also being responsible enough not to deliberately broadcast views that are knowingly false as well. And that doesn't need to apply to vaccines, it can apply to any debate at all. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call late night here on Talk Radio. All right, you may, of course, be aware that we are... Is he ready? Yes. It's just that he's not on the screen anymore. Dr. Bharat Pankhania, of course, is... what is Dr. Bharat Pankhania? Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'd lost it. It moved up. Senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, who is ready on video. Hello there, Dr. Bharat Pankhania.
Nice to hear your voice, Cristo. Good evening to everyone.
Tell us, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. Can you firstly tell us what your thoughts are on this vaccine, this new vaccine that apparently has been developed, and it's better than the Pfizer one, apparently?
Cristo, we're going to get a lot of plethora of manufacturers using airtime to tell us how good their vaccine is. And what I want to know is, where is the proof? I expect that they're all honorable companies and soon we will see the proof. But it really would be nice if the data, the experiment results, the safety findings, etc., were also released at the same time as the big press releases that they make telling us how good their vaccines are, because it also raises a lots of questions. So, for example, Moderna said 94% protective, and my immediate question was, in what way? Does it really protect and protect all groups, all people, 1 dose, 2 doses, and so many other similar questions, Cristo.
And a lot of people are making the point, I've seen them making it online on YouTube and through various other methods. A lot of people making the point, well, look, if we've got 98% or 98.8% immunity to COVID, or it's a mortality rate that people won't die if they get COVID, why is a vaccine that's only 90% effective going to work when our immunity system, certainly on paper, looks like it would be more effective?
Well, wild infection is always more immunogenic than a immunization. That we know from our work on vaccines and immunizations. I think people can get muddled about what does 90% protection mean. So what the 90% or 94% in Moderna's case they're trying to imply is that it protects 94% of the people that they immunize. That's basically what it's saying. Remember, when people die from a coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 infection, across all the age groups, the death rate is about 3% or so. But for age groups above 60, the death rates climb very, very steeply. So it goes from 8% to 10% to 14% in the 70, 80-year age groups. So there's a steep upward climb in the older age groups for SARS-CoV-2 infections.
So then if people take either one of these vaccines, a lot of people again making the point on social media that, look, most vaccines take many, many years in development, many, many years of testing. Many people are going to be quite worried that a vaccine for something so serious has seemingly been thrown together so quickly. What would you say to that?
Very confident in sort of reassuring our listeners. And Cristo, it is important to reassure our listeners. This is very, very important. So the story would go as follows. When a pharmaceutical company is on an adventure to find a vaccine for something, it has to do it slowly, slowly, and slowly, because what happens is it costs a lot of money. So it would go from stage one, phase one, to phase two, and then build up the war chest of money and go into phase three, and so on. In this case, what has happened is money has become a bottomless pit for the pharmaceutical companies manufacturing the vaccines. Therefore, what would have taken 10 years to to do because of money has now been done in a very short time because they had all the money to do rapid phase one, phase two, phase three. But I assure you, this is not a question of corners being cut. It's just that it was speeded up with a lot of money.
But will there be protections for people? I mean, I know you're not a representative, Dr. Pankhania, of the pharmaceutical company, and I respect you're not. But obviously, you're our most trusted expert on whether these things are safe for people, because obviously you will have been well aware. And look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe that vaccines have made the world a better place. But you will be aware that the anti-vaxxing movement is getting bigger and bigger. That's why we're seeing a lot of childhood diseases that are returning. And I think when you have vaccinations off the back of a pandemic like this, and a lot of the other areas of distrust that come from a pandemic like this around the government's response, around whether, some people thinking that certainly elements of it might be planned or whatever other kind of theories they have. Obviously, a vaccine coming in and talk of it not being mandatory worries people greatly. Why should people not be worried, Dr. Pankhania? Why is this going to be a good thing for people?
No, no, we should be worried. And in other words, what I mean by worried is we should be inquisitive and challenging and demand answers and questions and get those answers, those questions answered. It's very, very important. So it goes through these independent scrutiny, which is good. And then it goes through its licensing procedures, which is also good. And then the next step is when you start immunizing otherwise fit and healthy people, you need to be careful. So we should have a register of all the people who are immunized. That's quite easy, it's just patient records. But then you take a representative sample of that group of people who've been immunized across the world, and you actively, and what I mean by active, almost on a monthly, 6 monthly, or yearly basis, follow them up and see if there were any unexpected outcomes following these immunizations. So all of those safety measures we've also got to undertake. And I'm very pleased that there are lots of independent scrutinizers around in the world who will be looking at any untoward events from these vaccines. It's important we get it right.
I agree, but I also, and again, I agree, and I would take the vaccine. I probably wouldn't be in the queue to take it first, but I would take it once I was confident that the measures that you've outlined have been addressed. Where I think we have a big problem, Dr. Pankhania, and I don't know whether you agree with this, is that I think that, and perhaps this is the nature of pandemics, perhaps this is the nature of news media and social media today. Maybe it's a little bit of all of it thrown in, but I do think that there is a feeling out there that this has been an absolutely dreadful experience for pretty much everyone, but this disease getting out there has been good for various governments and good for various industries, including the pharmaceutical industry. And I think some people and I can't blame them for thinking this. Well, look at this entire story, this entire pandemic, the entire issues that have come from it, and then the great benefit that comes to pharmaceutical companies as a result of it, and the billions that will end up being made by pharmaceutical companies as a result of it. And they get very suspicious that this was something planned all along, or that there's some sort of impropriety, or maybe some opportunism. Again, with your medical expertise, do you understand where people's suspicions come from this? Do you understand why, when you look at the story in that respect, it all does look a little bit like it might all have been pre-planned, or something sinister is going on? Do you have sympathy for that?
I do, very much so. And the trust in our leaders is at a low ebb. And we've seen how leaders in the free Western world are behaving. And it stuns me that I'm living in an era whereby leaders can lie and nothing happens. Nothing happens. They lie and nothing happens to them. I remember in my time when Lord Carrington made a mistake over the Falklands and he resigned. That sort of thing just doesn't happen these days. So I do understand, and I'm very concerned, because as an independent doctor, I want to save lives. And I feel you, our leaders, have let the people down, and now there is lack of faith and trust in the medicines that the scientists wish to develop, and also lack of trust and faith in the pharmaceutical companies that are going to make these life-saving vaccines. So what I would say is we've got to get our messaging right. I remember on your rival studio, LBC, saying to Sheila Fogarty, we don't want the leaders making announcements and statements because we've lost faith in them. It would be better to have a trusted spokesperson who we have faith and trust in, who is now going to tell us, a bit like the chief medical officer or similar ilk, that this is the vaccine, this is the evidence, this is the safety profile, these are the things that we would recommend you do, devoid of political influence, so that we can restore that lost faith and trust that that people are worried about.
So on that token, then, Dr. Pankhania, should governments? We were talking in the last hour about how there's been a lot in the media recently, and a lot among many of the Western countries, about building back better or building back green, and trying to combine our recovery from COVID with climate measures, which involve maybe closing roads or trying to get traffic off the roads or getting people on public transport. Is it a huge misjudgment to try and combine these things? Because I can't help but feel that, again, by trying to sort of have the opportunism to say, well, COVID was bad, but hey, while all the cars are off the road, we'll bring in some environmental measures, all we're doing is fueling people's lack of trust to think that all of this has been in some way staged. I mean, if you were advising the government, would you be telling them to keep COVID separate from everyone else? Or would you be endorsing them using this terrible tragedy as an opportunity to try and improve things?
Yes, I hear you. So what I would say is don't do a land grab. Essential work on the environment, clean air, better transport policies, the global warming agenda are very, very important issues. Don't intertwine and intermix them with the SARS-CoV pandemic, because then you will lose the finesse of your message and it will appear as though you're having a land grab because the opportunity was there for you to do so. Those are all important issues, and I'm very much keen on preserving health. And by the way, Cristo, I personally feel that if we don't invest in prevention, there are worse things to come, worse than the SARS-CoV-2 that emerged as a novel virus. So we really must invest in prevention measures for emergence of new viruses, as well as loss of, for example, antibiotics, because we choose to feed antibiotics to animals because we want to have cheap meat by feeding them antibiotics. So yes, all those measures are important, just don't intermix them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that note, then, would it be wise for you, if you were advising the government, um, uh, what do you think would be their best strategy in order to keep public trust when it comes to a vaccine? Because you'd have heard the reason we're discussing this is because Matt Hancock has refused to rule out the vaccine being mandatory, either mandatory for everyone or mandatory in order for you to be able to sort of live your life. So if you want to get on a plane, if you want to go to work, if you want to get on public transport,
Yeah.
do you think that that's a wise strategy in conjunction with trying to gain public trust?
No, sir. And I'm so disappointed to hear that the Secretary of State for Health, and I'm putting it on record to you, Christo. So here I am. Wrong strategy. Compulsion doesn't work. Don't do it. I couldn't be more precise for you. You take your people with you. I have over 2 decades worth of experience advising parents who are concerned about the MMR vaccine, the pertussis vaccine, the seasonal influenza vaccine, and I know how to do it. I take my patients with me. I inform, I educate, I share their concerns, and I address their concerns, and then they decide. It's a free country. Allow people to decide freely. That's the better way.
I completely agree. Make people want to take it for themselves,
Agree.
because it staggers me, Dr. Pankhania, that this government has done so little to well, it's as you say, take the public with them. So much
Yes.
of there have been so many own goals that they have, open goals they've missed, own goals they've scored against themselves. It just
Yes.
seems completely ridiculous. And I guess we've not spoken for a few weeks, Dr. Pankhania, so it's nice to catch up with you again. But I guess the overriding question many months into this now, and it is the most important question that we seem to keep returning to. Um, Many of us understood the first lockdown. Many of us got the reasons why we needed the first lockdown. We understood that we didn't know as much about the illness. We didn't know as much about the response. We didn't know which drugs would be most effective. We didn't know which demographics in society would be most negatively affected by this. But have we screwed this up big time when it comes to our response since the first lockdown? We look at places like Sweden, where, yes, they've got those deaths, but their economy hasn't been hit as much as ours. We look at other countries that seem to be able to avoid locking down. We look at people who have come out and criticized lockdown, talking about all the mental health toll, the cancer diagnoses that aren't happening. We look at the mental health when it comes to our care homes. Have we got this wrong since the first lockdown? Should we have been doing more to avoid ever having to lock down again, Dr. Pankhania?
My shortest possible answer to you, Christo, and I try to be direct, is yes, we could have done better. We have not done as well as we can and should. And it saddens me because the United Kingdom is not some third world country. So we got our testing and tracing systems completely wrong. We continue even today, announcements like we're going to have mega labs built. Why? Why do you want to build these mega labs when actually, if you were to invest in local labs, they become an asset to the nation? When you invest in local contact tracing, they become an asset for the local authority and they do a much better job. I am in charge of one of the local authorities where we've got our own contact tracing happening. And I assure all our listeners, we are doing a great job. When we see a problem, we act fast, we act immediately, we don't go home until it's sorted. So it's that sort of dynamic things that people like myself, many of my colleagues have been talking for a long time. Allow the local leaders, the local experts to lead on this. But for whatever reason, our government has resisted this so far.
It's barking mad, because I think we are now in a situation where most people agree that some form of second lockdown that we were in was needed in order to suppress the growth in the virus. But what many people are forgetting is that we're only in the situation where the lockdown 2 is needed because of the failure after
Yes.
lockdown 1 to get us ready. And what I don't understand is why we didn't have a government at the end of lockdown 1 saying, right now, our entire efforts, everything we do now is about protecting the vulnerable and getting a system up and running that stops us ever having to lock down again.
Yes.
And we didn't do that.
In fact, when we came out of lockdown number 1, I am on record as saying we have come out of the lockdown prematurely. So the premature release of lockdown
we went into it prematurely, Dr. Pankhania. That's why we were in it so long, because we went into it too late, rather.
No, you're right. We went into the lockdown late. We came out early, and we came out with a large background level of circulating virus. Then the schools, universities, etc. opened, and within a few weeks of them opening, the case numbers shot up. Then again, we went into lockdown 2 a little bit late, and then we will come out of lockdown number 2 with the background viral activity still high. Therefore, we're not doing it right.
So, sorry, I've got so much more to ask you. It's like I'm catching up with an old friend, Dr. Pankhania. Thank you. But again, another big fear I have, I've been looking a lot online as well. And again, you'll be able to fill me in better than others about the cycle rate when it comes to PCR testing. Is it called the cycle rate? Is that what it's called? Cycle
yes, that's it. In other words, there's a heating and cooling and a heating and a cooling cycle for the RT-PCR. That's the gold standard test we do.
And when there is a rate which is under 35, then a virus can be cultured, and therefore it can be essentially you are transmittable within that virus, because the amount of virus means that you can transmit it. When your rate is over 35, though, the virus can still be picked up in your body, but it cannot be cultured, therefore created in a petri dish, therefore showing that it is not communicable. You are not infectious. So firstly, I'm right in saying that, right?
No, I'm not following you, because we never culture the viruses these days.
No, but I know you don't culture it, but what I meant was that I was watching something, and it was with the virologist Dr. Mike Eden, and he was talking about the PCR, the cycle rate, and that essentially what we're doing is we're giving positive tests to people who have a cycle rate over 35, but because the cycle rate is over 35, that means it is actually not communicable. You're not infectious because the amount of virus is so tiny. It's only when the PCR test shows under 35 that the virus is communicable. So my question is based on that, because we're giving everyone positive tests who are over 35 with no differentiation about whether they are infectious or not, and it's the same with people who have died of COVID as well, because your test will still show you have some COVID in the system and that you're over 35 with your cycle rate even many months after you might have died of COVID. Are we getting this horribly wrong when it comes to our figures? Because we're shutting down based on case numbers, but we've a flawed test when it comes to the cycle rate. We're shutting down based on deaths, but again, we're flawed test on the cycle rate.
I understand. I understand now. I understand what you're getting at, and indeed, that can and maybe is starting to become an issue. What I mean by that is, for example, if I had an infection, so it's now November, okay? So say I had an infection in September and I have recovered from that infection and I didn't know I had that infection. And then in November, so that's 2 or 3 months later, I go and have a test. The test will still be positive in many instances, but that doesn't mean I'm infected or infectious. All that the test is doing is picking up dead bits and pieces of the virus that I acquired in September. So that is
but if there are lots of people that applies to, and a lots of people who have died that applies to, because again, in your example, if you were ill in September and then in November or December you have a heart attack and you're given a COVID test and you're shown as positive for COVID, my big fear with this, Dr. Pankhania, is that we are locking down based on cases and deaths of COVID, which is on a test that might be referring to something that happened 3 or 4 months previously. So are we taking appropriate action based on appropriate figures?
Within reason, because we only look at death from COVID and registered as death from COVID if they were newly diagnosed within 28 days. So we do have a cutoff, which is only if it is within 28 days and it was a infection rather than asymptomatic without any signs and symptoms. And furthermore, look, we do have excess deaths. That's without a doubt. So if in doubt, what I would do is look at the last 5 years pattern for number of deaths in a given time, and then look at the same pattern for the year 2020. And if you look at the year 2020, we have got more people who have died than they would have compared to the previous 5 years. So we do know that we have a problem, and the deaths are attributable to both the SARS-CoV-2 infection as well as deaths from what I would call missed opportunities, the heart attacks, the cancers. I didn't go to the doctor because
and they will go down as excess deaths,
yes,
rather than
yes.
COVID deaths.
Yes.
I could talk to you all night about this. It's so fascinating, and I really appreciate your direct and honest responses. Dr. Bharat Pankhania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, always trusted advice from you, and we really appreciate it. So there you go. You can respond to that. More of your calls coming up, and from midnight we'll talk a bit of TED as well.
Dr. Pankhania, thank you so much for your time as ever.
This morning.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
On DAB and on the